Hi, welcome to Policy G. Take it from me, episode 5. This is Rob in the Brown Dog Studios with Susan Mogensen. Hi, Susan.
Hi, episode 5.
5 already.
5, keeping it alive
Helping you thrive.
while you drive.
All right, so what's up today, Susan? What are we going to talk about? Food again?
No, I have a little bit of a rant again.
Okay.
You know what bugs me?
Well, lots of things. I don't know, dishes in the sink, but probably some other things.
No. It's when people say it's political. I'm not going to join that board because I'm not political. Or something happens and they say, oh, yeah, well, it's political. And I feel like the word political is used very badly. It's used in a negative way. In our field of working with boards of directors, when we're talking about policy is a political conversation by,
Where the word comes from.
yeah, even this podcast, Policy G. You could say this podcast is political. But anyway, for me, when people use the word political, like it should be used to describe a conversation or situation where people are talking about political issue or a policy or sharing their values. Again, in policy governance, in boardrooms, we facilitate policy discussions all the time. And the political part is what happens before a decision is made. So people are exchanging their views and their perspectives and having different values and surfacing issues until finally they make a decision. And so all of that is, in a sense, political. Of course, political parties get involved in that and they have their own sets of values. And so in our system of government, you have different political parties and they're all hashing it out between each other. But then once the decision is made, it's made. So all the politics, the political discussion, the policy discussion, the exchange of values, all that part is done. But what bugs me is when the term is used after the decisions have been made. Take, for example, say your mayor of your town has been caught for speeding, and the police department decide not to charge the mayor. We don't want to do that because that would be political, right? But no, no, it's not political. The political part has already been done, establishing what the rules of the road are, what the traffic laws are. That was the political discussion at some point. What should the speed limit be? Now we've moved to the enforcement phase. And so if someone decides not to charge the mayor for speeding because, of some other reason, like he wasn't really speeding, it was only 1 kilometer or a mile above the limit or something else, there's other mitigating factors. Okay, that's fine. We understand that there is some discretion that police and law enforcement have when it comes to applying the law. But there shouldn't be people who are making decisions because somebody belongs to a political party. Oh, we can't enforce the law because that person is engaged in political discourse, legitimate political discourse, right? We're not going to charge the mayor for breaking the law. That would be political. No, that just doesn't wash with me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it sounds more like corruption or not following your own policies
Oh,
or laws.
right. Well, that's it. I think a lot of people use the word political when what they really mean is corruption, like a choice to not charge somebody with a crime where it's been investigated, the facts are clear, the law is clear, but we're not going to charge because the person has some sort of political connections or they're in a public representation kind of role. Well, that would be more of a potentially corrupt decision because you're not following the law. So instead of taking the facts and applying the law and then making a decision, you're choosing not to do that because the person is in a role like mayor or a member of Congress or parliament or whatever. That doesn't, to me, it just bugs me. And then people say, oh, yeah, they're not going to charge so and so because that would be political. Imagine if the mayor actually did something more severe, like broke into our house. He breaks into our house and he he finds the stash of cheese that we have in in the fridge. We've caught him. He's got the cheese in his arms. He's broken into our house. There's fingerprints all over the door. It's all him. We caught him in the act. He's on the security camera, right? And for the police to say, "Oh, well, we can't charge the mayor because that would be political." No, it's not. Your political conversations about what the laws are around break and enter have been made long time ago. So that just kind of bothers me because it first of all, it kind of makes political, like real political discussions or conversations about policies and values and legislation, it makes those that whole exercise that is required in public life seem somehow bad or sort of it's tarred with a brush that it shouldn't be, you know? So
Well, so if a politician or a former politician who has clearly committed crimes and there's evidence of that and there's no prosecution, is that political or is that just corruption?
well, I don't know. It depends. It could be that someone's just fearful for their job and they think, well, I better not charge the mayor or whatever because they are friends with the governor or the premier, and then I'll lose my job if I actually enforce the law. So it could be just some sort of personal, some kind of fear that's happening, but it could also be corruption. It could be that, someone has bought off the police chief to not charge the mayor because that would hurt the mayor's chances in the next election and so on. So it's not that every time a charging decision is delayed or not made means that there's corruption involved. I don't mean that. I just mean that a lot of the times when people say, "Oh, it's political," it's not really. It's not really. It's possibly more likely fear or corruption or choosing not to enforce the law for some other reason.
And it might not necessarily be bought off. It could be other inducements or threats for somebody to act or not act. And
Mhm.
that could be political in the sense of a political party is putting pressure on somebody, or it could be just fear of the repercussions of doing the right thing, but there isn't the courage to do the right thing. So might not be corruption, but there are these spurious influences come in to prevent the right thing being done.
Right. I wrote a blog post about those spurious influences. Remember we talked about, air traffic control? Let's think of the air traffic control example, right? Every time, just to ensure safety in the skies, there is a system that involves the control tower and the pilot or the co-pilot. And the system involves that and tell me if I get this wrong, that the control tower will give an instruction to the pilot or the co-pilot, and they will read back that instruction back to the control tower to confirm that the instruction has been heard correctly, right?
Correct.
That's how it works. Can you give us an example of what a control tower might say to a pilot?
Well, it's part of established procedures to ensure that everybody's on the same page and there was no mishearing or misreading or misunderstanding. So, air traffic control might say, Flight 123, you're cleared to land runway 31. And the pilot must read that back and say, Flight 123, cleared to land 31. And the air traffic controller will say, read back is correct.
Mhm.
They don't just issue an instruction and hope it's been heard and will be followed up on. So, there's that closing the loop, if you will, and the read back of the instructions or direction to ensure that the understanding was there.
Right. And so I make that analogy that the same thing is going on in organizations all over the place. Every time you have two people or two groups of people, or say a board and a CEO, there's an instruction that is given. And what you want back is a read back that, yes, I have received the instruction. And so person A would be the person with authority, And again, the cheese example, I'm person A and I'm telling you, go to the store, here's $50 to buy cheese for the party.
And that was in episode the cheese example,
Two,
to episode 2,
checking the
in case
cheese.
some listeners haven't heard the previous
Yeah.
episodes.
So I give an instruction. I'm A. Person A gives an instruction to person B. Person B acknowledges the instruction, and then they feed back. Well, in policy governance, we get into the any reasonable interpretation principle, which is really cool. But I'm not going to go there now. But it's just this repetitive kind of exchange that happens all through organizations where somebody gives an instruction, someone receives the instruction, they read it back, or they report back on what they did or what they heard. Okay. So corruption enters into this whole fray when someone comes between person A and B. So I give you $50 to go to the store to buy cheese for the party. And on your way to the store, someone comes along and says, "Hey, Rob, how much money you got?" And you say, "I got $50. I'm going to the store to buy cheese for the party." And this other person says, "Well, let me see. How about you give me that $50? And in exchange, I'll give you this old bag of crackers. And I got some boots that you could use." And you're like, "Oh, I like those boots. Great, thanks. I'll bring these crackers back and say that this cost me $50 and this is our cheese for the party." Well, that would be a spurious influence coming between A and B. When I gave you that money to buy cheese for the party, there is like this agreement that you're going to actually get the cheese for the party, that you understood my instruction and you're going to come back with it. So this is happening all the time when people get all upset about corruption. What's happening is this some kind of influence is coming between the A and B, whether A and B are, say, the people who elect a politician, or a board and a CEO, or a manager and a staff person. Whenever that influence comes in between the authority and the person who's accountable or responsible, that's when you start to get these cracks develop, that when they get really serious, it's corruption that hits the news.
And I suppose that interference or spurious influence could happen even though B has received the message, B has done the job, B has a deliverable, which is to come back with cheese. But on the way back, you get mugged and you get robbed of the cheese. So that's also another corrupt criminal influence on delivering your instruction.
Not that B was corrupt,
No.
but they were affected by someone else who was corrupt.
So completing that direction or instruction is still interfered with by an improper outside, undue, spurious influence.
Right. Remember in Get Smart with the cone of silence thing? I was thinking, like, every time there is an A and B where A gives an instruction to B, it's almost like there should be an agreement that's made more obvious that B, you are now responsible, and don't let anything unethical, imprudent, or illegal happen as I give you this $50 to go buy cheese for the party. There should be like this ring of responsibility instead of a cone of silence. There should be this more clear understanding that when you are given resources in order to accomplish something, you are now not liable, but you're now responsible for making that happen. And it's almost like if you don't make it happen, someone should be able to sue you or something. I don't know.
So does this underline why clarity is so important? Because if I give a contractor $20,000 to build a new deck
Hmm.
and we have nothing in writing to confirm that, and he ends up building me a shack, and I say, well, I wanted a deck, not a shack. Oh, I thought you said shack, not deck. And so if there was no contract or clarity or mutual understanding of what was expected, then you can't expect to get the results that you intended.
Right. You should get the read back
Mhm.
from the contractor
I will
that
build
says,
you a deck for this price.
yes. And you as the person who's paying the 20,000, you don't necessarily have to give them all the detailed instructions and use this many nails and
Or I might.
Well, you might,
Well, no,
yeah.
you don't just want anything. I mean,
Right.
you could be as specific as you want.
But you sort of tell them what you want, and there is some kind of contract between you so that if they build a shack instead of a deck, you can sue them or something,
Or
get your money back.
some other remedies, I guess, but
Yeah,
the whole point is to avoid that happening,
right.
so that there's clarity on both sides and the results are achieved as intended.
Hey, and you know what provides clarity? Policy governance.
Uh-huh. I thought you'd come back to that at some point.
Right. So, I guess we will talk a little bit more about policy governance, but it's this political that which started off with me just feeling like, oh, when they call something and they say, oh, I don't want to do that, that's political. Well, wait a second, do you really mean political, or do you mean corruption or fear or something else?
Okay, good. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back after this.
You want to make the world a better place, but how? So much to do, so little time. Well, serving on a board of directors is a great way to help create a better world, especially if that board has a clear system for achieving results. Learning how to be an effective board member used to mean reading big books and going to expensive workshops. But now there's engaging online training. The Board Accelerator is a web-based governance course that lets you learn at your own pace and place. Whether you're considering joining a board or serving on one now, the Board Accelerator gives you key insights and the confidence to be an effective board member. To learn more, visit browndogconsulting.com and click Book a Call. Talk soon.
And we're back. So, Susan, how does policy governance deal with corruption?
Well, I will say one thing for starters, and that is that John Carver himself says no system can make corrupt people incorruptible. Okay, that's just no can do. But policy governance has some really amazing principles that really help to reduce the risk of corruption happening in organizations or give people a way to kind of find out about it very quickly. And so, the first principle of policy governance that really helps to mitigate corruption, I would say, is the owner accountability principle because it speaks to board members joining a board of directors, serving on that board of directors on behalf of the ownership. So, that linkage that we were talking about initially between A and B, when board members join a board of directors, they should instantly know that we are here to serve A. We are here on behalf of the owners. So, in that A B scenario, as far as board members are concerned and owner accountability, like they are like the B. They are you going off to the store to buy the cheese, right? So that is the first principle that helps to remind everybody we're not just here for our own self gratification as board members. We are here on behalf of someone else. And so it'd be good to have the read back through ownership linkage and all of that. And it's funny, I feel like this principle is so critical. It's totally the foundation of policy governance, and I feel like if an organization or a board is not willing to accept the principle of owner accountability, then they're not going to accept any of the rest of policy governance. There's no point in even going there. In fact, I had that experience once. It was really weird where I was subcontracted to a membership organization, like through another consultant to a membership organization, and I was teaching the other consultant about the governance stuff. They brought me in to do the governance piece for them. And so I went through all of the principles of policy governance initially with that consultant. And then I was introduced to the president of this organization. And so now I'm going through the principles with him. And we start with the first one about owner accountability. And he said, I don't like that principle. And I'm like, are you serious? And he said, yeah, I don't think that board members should be accountable to anyone. All of our board members are accountable to themselves internally. So when they wake up in the morning, they're like, I'm accountable to myself. And I'm like, what? How How is that supposed to work? They're a board of directors that's at the top of an organization that has like thousands of members. Do they not feel, or do you not feel like the board should be accountable to its own members? And he's like, nope, nope. All the board members are accountable to themselves. So I said, well, if you're not going to go down the road with me on this very first principle, I don't think we're going to be working together at all here. And sure enough,
They
a
weren't.
few hours later, I got the call. Yeah, I don't think we're going to work with you anymore. So, and that's fine because I can't go there if our starting place is that board members are only accountable to themselves. How are we going to get any further?
But in some cases, ownership isn't as clear as, say, in an equity corporation or a for-profit company. But say even in the case of membership, whether it's membership or actual owners, if they're not accountable to them, on whose instructions are they acting for whose benefit?
Their own personal instructions. They
Because
self-instruct themselves.
because they're so highly evolved and so special that they can just do the best for the organization in a paternalistic kind of way with no direction.
I don't know. I don't know. And you're right. It is sometimes difficult to discern who the owners are. We have those conversations with clients all the time. In this case, though, it wasn't one of those cases where it was going to be really sort of nebulous or difficult to figure out. It was very obvious in their case who the owners were, but he didn't even want to go there. So it was really weird. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying that that organization was corrupt or anything, but if an organization is like that, where the board doesn't see that they're accountable to anyone, what's gonna motivate them to do the right thing in terms of the organization? I just don't know how that's supposed to work.
It's also potentially the road to dysfunction, isn't it? Because if you've got a board of directors who's just acting on whatever they feel like that day,
Yeah.
then how is that good for the organization?
Dysfunction junction.
There you go. I'm thinking about another membership organization, say a national hobby organization. There are paid members,
Mhm.
and the directors could reasonably think, well, we are accountable to the paid up members, but they also have an advocacy role with, say, a federal or local regulator. So they have to act on behalf of all of these hobbyists, many of whom are not members, with the regulator. So I can see why that makes it difficult sometimes to determine who the ownership is. It's not just the membership.
Right, right, and that does enter into it, and distinguishing between stakeholders and owners and beneficiaries and customers. We'll get into that in another podcast, but just on the corruption thread, I'm just thinking, well, first we need to know that board members are accountable to somebody, and it could be that the board itself is the ownership. So, okay, that's usually the exception, not the rule, but the owner accountability principle is number one at stopping the corrupt influences. Number two would be the executive limitations principle, which puts off limits for the person at the top of the operational side of the organization, whether it's a CEO or executive director or general manager, whatever. Having executive limitations policies that say don't do anything illegal, imprudent, unethical, or possibly not, don't do anything contrary to standard business practices or our culture or whatever. And having those executive limitations policies and the way the policy governance architecture works, or the policy sizes principle works, it means that boards do not have to anticipate every single possible crime that could happen, or every single possible unethical or breach of ethics or anything. They don't have to think in advance of that and list them all. They just use the way policy governance system works, and that way they put off limits anything unethical, imprudent, or illegal. So now it's like in the exchange between A and B, there's clarity around, okay, I'm giving you this $50 to go buy cheese for the party, and you know what your boundaries are. Like you're not allowed to
Buy bread or booze or
steal the cheese from
yeah,
the store and pocket the $50, right?
or just take the money and never come back.
Yeah, right. Because we've established executive limitations. And then the third big piece that helps to stave off corruption as best as possible is the monitoring system. because now we're going to check, like as we talked about in previous podcasts, we're going to check to make sure that the executive limitations were actually met, that they were actually followed. So we've got a whole complete system where the board's accountable, we're clear about what's off limits, and we're going to check to make sure that that off limit stuff didn't happen. So I think that is the three main ways that policy governance mitigates the risk of corruption. It doesn't necessarily eliminate it. We're still humans, right? But that I think is really really important for people to understand.
Okay, very good. Well, at that point, seems like a good spot to take our final break, and we'll be back in a few moments.
Hey, have you ever wanted to make a quick comment, ask a question, or signal something during a meeting without interrupting the person speaking? Reading body language and keeping people engaged is hard enough at the best of times. That's why we designed Meeting Helpers, a visual tool for communicating without interrupting. Each set of meeting helpers lets you applaud someone's idea, let people know they're getting off track, point out a process issue, and much more. Visit browndogconsulting.com to get copies of the original meeting helpers for your board or team today.
Okay, we're back. And Susan, you talked a little bit about, well, a lot about corruption and ethics. So, what if a CEO is unethical, even in an organization that claims to be ethical?
It can happen. It can happen for sure. And I think as the board has to have a lot of courage. The board has to have the courage of its convictions and use its policies for what they're there for. If the board is using policy governance and they're all into ethics and transparency and all of that, then they should simply look at, well, what do our policies already say? What have we already said about unethical behavior? And of course, again, they might not have anticipated the particular, unethical thing that happened, but they will have an executive limitation policy, for example, that says don't do anything illegal, imprudent, unethical. So they can use that. And the first step is always to look at the monitoring of that. Okay, we said this. Now, what's the latest monitoring report? What does it say about compliance with that policy? And if they know about something that's missing from the report, then they would have every right to ask for a new and improved report on that. And again, when there's lack of compliance with a policy, any policy, it could be it could be something that's very, very serious, and then the board has to take sort of more strict or extreme action. Or it could be something relatively mild where the board looks at what happened and goes, well, we can kind of understand that. These things happen. Don't let it happen again. Give us another monitoring report on this in 3 months or something. And they can be sort of more forgiving and understanding if it's kind of a milder example. But the short answer to your question is that boards have to use the system that's there for them. They've got to, in this example that you're sharing, it sounds like they already have the policies in place. So it's a matter of basically enforcement. It's like the police officer and the mayor. The policy or the law is already in place about speeding. Now it's just enforcement. It's not personal, it's just enforcement, right?
And sometimes it could be a rule for me and a rule for thee. So, yes, ostensibly and public facing, they're ethical, they don't do anything illegal or imprudent. But then something happens internally, and then there's this tendency to want to overlook it or give it a pass because this could have implications for the organization if we're hard on this executive.
Right. And I mean, who among us hasn't made mistakes or, you know, not completed the A, B read back or fulfilled expectations? These things happen. But the great thing about policy governance is it sort of does take the personal aspect out of it because it's like we're not hounding you, CEO, for what you did. We're just saying, okay, here's what our policy says, and here's what the evidence says. And there's a lack of alignment there. So let's either bring up the behavior to match the policy, Or let's scrap the policy or water it down so it isn't as strict. I Before we go today, I wanted to mention for sure that if you are enjoying this podcast, please subscribe. And you do have the option to leave us a voicemail that we can then play on a future podcast. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're already subscribed to our YouTube channel, then you can subscribe to one of the podcast platforms, subscribe to us on there. So that really helps us a lot. And we also are really curious to get your feedback. Send us voicemails, send us questions to deal with on future podcasts. And speaking of future podcasts, this is number 5. Most podcasts out there that you listen to are more of an interview format. Like it's you and me, Rob. You're interviewing me. But then other podcasts will then have special guests, right? And we are thinking about different things to do on this podcast that could be really interesting and spicy and fun. We're not likely to have long, ponderous, kind of serious interviews, but I think we're going to do some other fun things. So please stay tuned and follow us along. And also feel free to share news of this podcast with your other friends and colleagues.
Okay. Well, thanks, Susan. That looks like a wrap for episode 5. And we'll see you next time. I'm Rob in the Brown Dog Studios.
And I'm Susan.
Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you for listening. Please share this podcast with your friends, colleagues, and fellow board and staff members. For the show notes, choose the podcast tab at browndogconsulting.com. This episode was produced by Brown Dog Consulting, hosted by Susan Mogensen and Rob Ludlow, and edited by Sandra Mogensen. Bye for now.